Welcome to You Can't Break Us, the podcast sharing real stories of parental alienation and family court injustice. I'm your host, Kaylin Hawkinson. Each episode, I sit down with brave guests who open up about their personal journeys, the pain, the resilience, and the fight for justice. These stories are raw, real, and powerful because speaking out is how we break the silence and remind the world, you can't break us. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for being here today. I have Anne Wintemute, an expert in domestic violence, coercive control, and the co-founder of Aimee Says, which is an AI-supported platform. So, Anne, you've dedicated your career to helping survivors of coercive control and post-separation abuse. Can you share what led you into this field?
Well, I just get really excited about tackling the systems that fail women and children. So this space is actually a relatively new career for me. I've been doing this for about 6 years. Prior to that, I worked in evidence-based maternity care and advocating for that. I worked in education in the K-5 space. I actually built a school that I thought did a much better job of representing how to actually serve the needs of kids in that age bracket. And now I'm trying to kind of fiercely fight back against the system that fails women and children who have been experiencing domestic violence, relationship abuse, and are just trying to stay safe and get out.
Wow, that's a lot, and I love that you do this. It's a very important field. What inspired you to create Aimee Says, and what gap did you see that pushed you toward building an AI-supported platform?
Yes. So when I started, I was coaching, I was consulting, I was working directly with women who had ended their relationships, believing that would make the abuse stop, and were really shocked to find out about this thing called post-separation abuse. And really, their family court cases were severely impacted by the presence of this post-separation abuse. So I was consulting one-to-one. Then generative AI came out, and my co-founder, Stephen Nichols, and I were like, well, wait a minute, this is impacting 10 million people in the United States each year alone. Mm-hmm. We cannot address the scale of harm unless we implement technology. How do we use these new advances in technology to help meet needs that couldn't be met before, or in the case of people who worked with me, could only be met if they could afford my fees? I mean, and I felt my fees were appropriate. I was highly skilled, but they're not accessible to people. Also, I get sick. I go on vacation. I sleep at night. I have children who need me. I could never be as available as something like technology could be. So that's really why we really invested in that space and have built as much as we have in our AI tool.
I love that. That's a really great idea that you had, and it's so inspiring because, like you said, it's like a 24/7 support then, and humans can't realistically do that. How do you define coercive control, and why do you think it's so often misunderstood or minimized by legal professionals?
Gosh, there's force, right? I keep you in this room because I physically restrained you, and to both the people in the room and anyone looking, there is the absence of a choice, right? This person is unable to make a different choice. They're physically forced, or they're forced through some other means. Coercive control is the illusion of choice. It's the cage with an open door. And but which you feel like you can't, exit the cage because something else will happen. And I think one of the reasons it's so difficult for people to see on the outside, and it's not just courts, it's your mom, it's, your best friend, it's your abusive partner's family, whatever, is when there is an illusion of choice, they don't understand why you don't make a different one. And it's kind of like if you look at just a picture, and visual is the only sensory input you have to assess the situation. Well, in the picture, she looks distraught and he looks calm and cool. So I'm looking at a situation where we have a poor guy who's putting up with an overly emotional woman. But, when you're in it, you can smell the smells right? You can hear the sounds. You have so much more input, so much more detail to that story. But courts can only see that photo. And it's an incredibly, it's difficult to tell, a judicial officer how the room smelled, right? Like what those things that they can't see because they didn't experience it personally because they weren't there. It's really hard to convey those.
Right. And kind of just using the analogy of a photo like that, I mean, it just makes me think so many people who are in abusive, coercive control relationships, they can smile in a photo too. They can sit next to someone, be smiling. That's can be survival mode. Someone is doing what they have to do to be okay. And from the outside view though, like you're saying, someone will look at that picture and be like, they're fine. They look happy. So.
And the person can be happy in that photo, right? If the relationship was constantly horrible, right? The likelihood, I should say, that it was constantly horrible is actually pretty low. This, the tug, the cycle, well, it was nice here. And well, yes, after that bad thing happened, but then he was nice. It is possible. Yeah. Many people experience periods of happiness, periods of a sense of restoration, whatever. So, if you're looking at that picture of yourself, if you're listening to this and thinking I was happy in that moment, that doesn't mean that you were not a victim of abuse.
Right. Very true. Of course, there is definitely kind of a tug and pull, like you said. They tend to have patterns like that where, the calm happens after the storm and they kind of keep you in that loop. And it makes it harder to leave someone like that too, because you think of the good times and hope for that.
Yes.
What are some of the common patterns or behaviors that survivors don't always recognize as coercive control?
Gosh, that's a good question. Coercive control looks very different in different relationships. I see relationships where, the controlled partner actually has a great deal of autonomy, so long as kind of a short list of needs and expectations are met. That person has still very much modified their life in order to accommodate that. Accommodate essentially the purse strings that allow them to navigate other aspects of their life without a lot of control. And then people who are in militant relationships where they have only the illusion of choice across a broad diverse domains of life. It's when you're in the relationship, that illusion of choice will allow you to feel like you are, in fact, making the choice, right? So in those coercive control relationships, it's really easy to miss it. It's really easy to miss what's going on because you yourself feel like you might feel like you have that choice in that relationship. It is, coercive control builds slowly over time. We've all heard that, the metaphor about putting the frog in the pot and turning up the heat slowly. But if you ask yourself, is it safe for me to disagree in this relationship? Does it feel safe to disagree? Do I feel like I have a true choice, or do I feel like I have only one choice that keeps me safe? Those are questions that, regardless of what your relationship looks like, can really help you suss out if there's a power and control, dynamic, a power imbalance in your relationship that's keeping you from being able to be fully yourself.
Yeah, those are good questions to point out for anyone who's listening that even might question or wonder if they're experiencing it. Asking yourself simple questions like that can kind of point to the right direction of understanding and realizing. So in your experience, where do courts and child protection agencies fail the most in cases involving coercive control and post-separation abuse?
Well, I guess in looking at that picture, the moment a victim or survivor attempts to tell her story to a system, the moment that she becomes reliant on a system to hear and understand that story in order to take the right protective actions, things can go really haywire. You're asking this question because it's the frequency rate, of the wrong decisions being made, or the wrong person being determined to be the primary aggressor or the person who's contributing to the problem. That frequency rate is really, really high. I think that there is a lack of understanding I want to be like really like in my best, most altruistic interpretation of where people go wrong. It's if you haven't experienced it, it's really hard to understand.
Yeah.
You can't describe or identify a humid environment if you've only ever lived in Denver, Colorado, right? Where it's dry all of the time.
Yeah.
There is a lack of vision into something that is so insidious, so invisible. And I don't want to say that it's hidden because it's identifiable, but so invisible to people. And it is easier to use kind of a more comfortable set of tools and assessments and accusations and gender biases and stigma to define a situation, to describe it, than to, really be able to deeply understand it with a sense of curiosity.
Yeah. And mentioning how it is identifiable, but it's hidden at the same time. And that goes back to someone like you who is trained and knows how to kind of see it or find it. So needing to have professionals that are actually trained in this and knowledgeable that can identify and understand this, which it seems like courts lack. So, having professionals there for it. Why is the legal system so quick to label these cases as high conflict instead of recognizing it for what it is, abuse?
I think I would answer that question similarly. It is a lot easier to use kind of those quick grab, she's just being overly emotional, or, these are just false accusations in order to get what she wants. The quick grab, the stereotypes, the biases, and a certain amount of, there is a level, an atmosphere of disdain for litigants in the family court space that I think is toxic to a judicial officer's ability to be open and curious about a case. So, they're going to hit back to those quick, I see this all the time. This is ridiculous. I hate that I see you guys in my courtroom. And then they fail to deliver justice. And then they get upset when there is no peace.
Yeah.
Right? And as people end up back in front of that judge again.
Yeah, I have personally experienced before being told you need to stop coming to court, when yet I was not actually the one doing that, and I was not the one violating orders as to why we were back in court. So I definitely think there is a lot of kind of bias and maybe also not looking enough into the actual evidence or case before speaking to people and how they treat us.
It's in a darker format than just a lack of curiosity. It's laziness. It's just the easier way to go. Get mad at both of them. Tell them both that they need to straighten up their house and stop punishing their children, because it is actually it is hard to weed through all of the intricate, woven into each other threads that are coercive control, that are relationship abuse. And it is easier, although a huge failure of epic proportions with devastating outcomes, but it's easier to be lazy.
Right. Unfortunately, that seems to be a widespread case. What changes would make the biggest difference in helping courts identify real patterns of manipulation and control?
If we could shift toward curiosity and away from what I see, in the courtrooms as a palpable disdain for litigants, if we could shift towards curiosity, I think that it wouldn't only lead to much better outcomes, but it would reduce how re-traumatizing the legal system is when you feel like you walk in and presumptions have already been made about you, been made about your case. And that would be no easy feat. Curiosity is an incredibly vulnerable attribute. It raises the possibility that you don't know the outcome before the whole thing has begun. And that is not, kind of consistent with the ethos of people who are sitting behind the bench. There's a commanding sense of authority. There's a responsibility to kind of quickly dispatch, within the allotted time. Those things are contrary to curiosity. They don't, allow curiosity to grow. But yeah, if I could inject a personality trait into, everybody in a black robe that's got a gavel in their hand, it would be to lean into that curiosity, hear things you might not have otherwise heard before. Because I think you will find that these are really complex cases that go sideways because of a lack of curiosity and coming into it with a presumption.
Yeah. And about presumptions, I've also seen before that whether it's a gal or amicus, maybe they talk to, the side they talk to first. Then when they go to talk to the other side, it's like they have that assumption made just based on what the one side said already. And I've seen that enough times too, where you're not giving the other side the fair chance. You're not listening to both sides. Then you listen to one and then go to the other one already assuming that that's the only side to it. So
yes, and if the side you talk to first is the one that has the kind of easiest, like I said, quick to grab, like, oh, well, this describes this, and this is why this is happening, then yeah, it's a lot harder to come into the other one and do the work of curiosity. I think that there are a handful of simple questions that GALs, CFIs, PREs, custody evaluators, legal representatives, et cetera, could ask themselves that would help them much more quickly identify whether or not there's a power and control dynamic. And one of those is, I used it before, is it safe to disagree with this person? And ask those people in private. I can darn near guarantee you that in a power and control dynamic, one person will say no and one person will say yes. And the next question is why? What happens when you disagree? What happens when you disagree about a financial thing? What happens when you disagree about a decision about the kids? And then asking, okay, so you have choice A or choice B. What happens if you do one and what happens if you do the other? See if there's an illusion of choice, because we order these families where coercive control is present into joint custody, into joint legal decision making. And I was using this metaphor the other day. It's like putting these two people in a group project at school where they share the grade. When one of those people in the group project, and I've got kids in elementary, middle school, and high school right now, and they all hate group work because the one person, it only takes one person to sabotage, to sink the boat, right, if you will, and ruin the good faith effort of the rest of the people in the group. And when there's a coercive control dynamic present or post-separation abuse, whatever you want to call it, you are tasking these people with this joint project with a huge consequence if you fail, right? Because the joint project is to meet the needs of the child or the children. When one of them will willfully undermine, sabotage, redirect all of the work, and value that the safe and protective parent has to contribute. The impact of getting these cases wrong is really horrific.
Yeah. And speaking of a group project, like that analogy for it, which I think explains it very well, just in my own personal experience, kind of to that point, I was put on I'm not on it now, but I was put on the National Abuse Registry because my child's father was put on it, and he called making false accusations on me to retaliate on things. And so DHS actually told me, we're combining your reports, which one, it shouldn't have been. They combined us. Yeah. I was not founded. He was founded. But since they literally said, but you're both his parents, so we're putting you both on it. And then she told me, you need to go hire an attorney to appeal it. Just straight out told me, like, you should do this because we know we're wronging you, but they didn't care. And so I did have to hire an attorney, and they did. They admitted, they took me right off it, and they admitted there was no reason to have me on it. So I've definitely seen it firsthand.
Wow.
Kind of to that point.
Yeah, that's a really horrible example of, having to pen both of your names at the
Yeah.
top of a terrible paper. Yes. And, another thing that is evident in that story that you just told that is really, really awful. It gave me a bit of a visceral response. Shoot, I lost my train of thought. The continued entrapment, right? Like that no matter how hard you work to differentiate yourself, if you are going to be the one held accountable for the harms of that perpetrator, you are still entrapped in that relationship.
Yeah.
You are not free from that relationship. And then that example that you gave, and certainly in a court ordering to, joint decision making, for example, that entrapment was not even caused by the perpetrator. Right? That was caused by the system that is supposed to be able to discern, fact from fiction and do the right thing. And that's how those systems perpetuate the same power and control dynamics and keep you entrapped in abuse.
Exactly. And then that creates, untrustworthiness. People are scared to go to the systems for help because they see how much injustice happens.
Yep.
And then people don't get the help they need. It's a sad cycle.
Yes, or if you become, frustrated or hostile towards the systems that are harming you, that becomes further evidence that you may in fact be the problem.
Right.
These systems are not tolerant of being challenged, of being questioned, of being told that they did something wrong. Again, that's a lack of curiosity, with sometimes grave consequence.
Yeah, exactly. So Aimee Says places a strong focus on evidence preparation and pattern recognition. Why is documentation so critical for survivors navigating custody cases?
So what Aimee is an AI-enabled tool that helps you understand your story and helps you tell your story. And the way that works is that you show up and you produce what we would refer to as unstructured data. And hang on with me for this storytelling here. Your unstructured data is your story. It is your lived experience. It is often messy. It's complicated. It's distorted by, the impacts of abuse on you and your self-doubt and your, lack of confidence and, in being a credible narrator of your own experience. And the first thing that Aimee does is help you understand that story, that chaos, help calm that, help validate that, help you understand how your story, how what's happened to you is a part of your story, how it's impacted you. And then when we come to the question that you asked around gathering that evidence and documentation, is one of the things that we know is that other people, kind of generally, unless they're also survivors or really good allies, and systems especially, are nearly allergic to domestic violence and relationship abuse stories. We are so quick to blame the victim that the way we tell our story determines often the entire outcome of our case. So Aimee helps you understand your story. And then what's going on with all that evidence and that documentation and in the background, she's tagging it, she's labeling it, she's putting it on a timeline, she's sticking it in a bubble chart. She's helping to collate that information, associate it with other parts of your story. She's turning your unstructured data into structured data that tells a story people are able to hear, willing to hear, that feels like, incontrefutable proof that the chaos that the perpetrator is spinning is not in fact true, that there is a clearer narrative, something that feels more objective. So it helps you take that story and make it something that other people will listen to without any additional load on you, right? Like survivors should not have to instantaneously become legal experts, domestic violence advocates, experts in coercive control, so that they have the right or the privilege to stand up in a courtroom and ask for what should be theirs: safety, peace, that the law as it is written is applied to them. The fact that we ask survivors to do that is, heck, that really keeps me up at night. That feels like a burr in my paw, Kaylin. It really, really makes me mad.
Yeah.
And that is what we have trained an AI to do, so that the survivor doesn't have to. So they can just show up, talk like they're talking to a friend who isn't going to accidentally invalidate them, or that doesn't need to get off the phone because, they've got to go out to dinner with their partner, whatever. Is ever present and doing so much of that, the labor that allows people to find the personal healing and the legal protections and safety that they need to no longer be entrapped in that relationship.
Yeah, and I love that it does both, like you mentioned, the legal aspect to help you in court, as well as just for your own personal healing journey. It helps kind of recognize those patterns and structure it, like you said, and kind of educate, teach you about what's going on and what's happening, and break it down of narcissistic abuse and what's, coercive control.
Yes, absolutely. The first thing that people need to know is that they're not crazy, that there's a name for it. And the second thing they need is, okay, now go tell that person, because, I really need to be able to end this relationship. I really need to be able to get my child a new doctor, whatever the obstacle is in that moment.
Yeah, I wish I knew about it when I was going through things, because it sounds like such a useful resource for people to use. And again, even just the validation point, a lot of people that go through this, kind of like mentioned, feel crazy, feel unsupported, isolated. And so just having that to say, basically, hey, you are validated, this is real, and I'm here to help you.
Yes.
That's very supportive for people.
Yes, it absolutely is.
Yeah. What types of documentation do you find are most persuasive or helpful for attorneys and courts?
So the labeling aspect, kind of coding things into a data set that's accessible, right? Like if I'm telling my story, it's going to be kind of a long format that's probably difficult to suss out the kind of critical, legally relevant details. So being able to distill things down to, let me sound a little bit up in the clouds, distilling it down to the audience that needs it, right? So if I'm distilling down my experience to something that my therapist can understand, it might be like, I experienced a lot of psychological abuse and I questioned my reality. Here's a couple of examples. In a legal context, it may be, I have serious concerns about my child's safety, and my child experiences similar coercive control to what I did and is unable to, to develop appropriately emotionally. Here are the examples.
Yeah.
The audience matters, right? The story you tell to each audience really matters. So beyond that, things like visual data. This is a frequency rate. This is the number of days that were missed. Here are the dates. Being able to see things, kind of map them out more clearly with a timeline, with a calendar, with something like our bubble charts. Those help people help people feel like they have an understanding of the situation in a way that lets them take whatever steps they need to for you, right? Which is different if it's your therapist, your mom, your attorney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, again, very resourceful for people to have that, even in their own personal relationships, like you're mentioning, not even just specifically legal wise, but in everyday life, if you're trying to kind of understand how you can even explain this to someone or seek help at all. So how can survivors document coercive control in a way, well, actually, you kind of just mentioned this, a way that courts actually understand and take seriously, which you kind of mentioned how it can create bubble charts, it can track days missed, it can track all kinds of things. Would you say that's the best way to go about it then, and that's courts should take that more seriously and maybe uncover maybe it's hard to say that they'll take it seriously because lack of trust there again in systems, but to have just this hard proof evidence of this has really structured and laid out all this evidence of how it's specifically affecting a child, especially, is that the best proof you'd say to take into court?
So snippets, getting really granular. And it's not necessarily zooming in, it's just distilling what are the most important parts of this. And this is something that is really hard for trauma survivors, because when we are triggered, when we are in fight or flight, it's actually really difficult for us to identify the pieces of information that are relevant in a specific context, which is why you get to go put in that unstructured data and still distill the structured stuff. So distilling things down to, we were unable to leave the house freely without fear of retribution, right?
Yeah.
Here are two examples. That is very different and much easier to kind of access, see, digest in a short period of time than telling in a longer format those 3 times where, you tried to leave the house, but you would say, like, I was supposed to go out with friends, but then this thing happened and this thing happened. Your judge has already come up with 3 reasons to reject this because she's converted the story to her, like as though it's her own experience. Well, I'm just going to leave the house if I want to because she doesn't experience coercive control. So really being able to distill it down, pictures, colors, graphics are all helpful distillations.
Very, very true and very helpful again. So how does ongoing manipulation affect a child's identity, emotional development, and sense of self?
I hope that this is a field of study that we will accelerate and come up with some better information and evidence about now. There is a distinct lack of trust in the ways that the impacts on kids have been weaponized into like a cottage industry, if you will. Like I can pay this person to come and talk about this impact on kids, and a lack of industry or field-wide consensus around the impacts on kids. So we're still using, the data from a long time ago that I would absolutely question and challenge, that, kids benefit from having both parents in their lives equally and free access to both parents, there's a lot of, smaller studies that having an abusive parent, you're better off just having a non-abusive parent. And then a pretty strong industry that has come out to challenge when protective parents say, my kid doesn't want to see the perpetrating parent. It's a really strong kind of pseudoscience response that is having children removed from the safe parent and placed into the custody of the perpetrating parent. That is those kids are going to become the case study for how we learn about the impacts of weaponizing the children in the family court system in order to gain some advantage in that court system.
Yeah, it would be really great. It does seem very outdated. I know there are experts out there trying to further this field, such as you, and have, real science, real studies, and really for court reform and, make it better for people. But again, kind of back to estrangement kind of versus parental alienation, so to speak, a child that is like weaponizing a child. When a child is coached, coerced, they can very much say, I don't want to see that other parent. So they need to have better things in place, questionnaires, experts involved that can break that down and show that it's coercion. It's not true estrangement. It's not a justifiable reason. It's specifically based on one parent coaching that child. So it ruins a lot of family dynamics because it is not, people are not knowledgeable enough that are in these places to make these decisions.
And what we've seen in that, the term that is most often used is parental alienation. And I prefer something, like DV by proxy or, the malicious fracturing of the relationship with the child or the attachment to the child. Those are intentional acts that are very much the long arm of post-separation abuse. And in those cases, certainly much more likely than not, they are just kind of the next train stop on this line of abuse that was present, or line of control and power and control dynamics that was present along the entire train ride. Where we've gone sideways is that term, which parental alienation, which I prefer not to use just because of its originations, is used as a weapon against legitimate claims or accusations of domestic violence. And when we see it happen in that order, for example, victim or targeted parent comes in and says, he's abusive to the child, and then the other parent cross-claims parental alienation, we see the wheels fall off the bus. And one of the things that's really sad about that is, as protective parents fight against the kind of malicious use of that term, they're closing, we're losing the window, the stage on which to talk and say, yes, but the malicious fracturing of the relationship with the child is real, right? When this thing is a continuation of abuse, it is real. It is not just a cross-claim that's meant to divert accountability, place accountability for the perpetrator's harms, that they caused to their child onto the safe parent. It's tricky. It's layered. People lose interest and start pointing fingers long before you can, really get out to the meat of it. And actually, you know what? I like that, what I just said. That's what's wrong going on in the courtrooms. It takes so long and so much information to really describe the dynamics of a coercive relationship that they lose interest and start pointing fingers and coming up with assumptions just to get it over with. To not have to listen to the whole thing. It's a lot.
That's very true. Again, kind of back to my own personal experience, not just me, but others I've talked to as well, but in my own, there are definitely times where the other parent is constantly violating. So they are, you can file whatever you want. So they can file motion after motion after motion just to drag it on and just to, get what they want by doing that. And I have had it where, they got sick of it, but that's not my doing. That's the other party's doing. And then then both sides are affected negatively because then they kind of want to just shove you at the door and not deal with you. And I have definitely experienced that.
This project work, your name is at the top of the same paper. You two just need to figure it out. Like, I am different. Why do you keep assigning me group work with this person who is sinking our group work ship?
Yeah, right. And kind of back, I know you don't like that term, but back to that, it's really showing the behaviors behind it, and it's really breaking that down and trying to really explain the behaviors and show the seriousness behind that, the abuse and what's happening.
Yes.
How does technology help fill the gap between therapy, legal advice, and advocacy work, especially for survivors who feel unsupported?
Well, advocacy work, if I'm putting on a survivor hat, advocacy work is for people who face immediate or imminent risk of direct physical violence in a really short time span, right? So if I'm engaging with the domestic violence hotline or a local organization, they have a limited scope of services, kind of at peak crisis, if you will, right? And a handful of things typically need to be present, really that risk.
Yeah.
Lawyers are really expensive. They are inaccessible to most people. And even, for those who, their pocketbooks are just endless, call me if that's you. You would fund our company. Yeah. Even for that, they're not always available. They don't always have the trained response. They're not able to help you with a whole lot of the tasks that come with having legally addressable needs with an abusive partner. Mm-hmm. Therapy is maybe once a week for an hour. Like, listen, people who are experiencing abuse or recovering from it or, in a post-separation abuse phase, it impacts every minute of every day and everything that they do, every person they engage with. It impacts their work and their ability to show up. It impacts their ability to school and get an education, to parent, to be friends with people, to engage with their family, to get the Christmas presents wrapped. The impact of abuse is so vast, so pervasive, so like mycelium into your existence, that there is no other human-based service that would ever be able to meet those needs. So even if you can pay for the therapy, even if you can pay for the legal advice, even if you used an advocate, in that 6-month period of the 15 years of time span of this abuse, it would never be enough. Mm-hmm. Like, we need technology. We didn't have it before. We need technology to fill this gap because that gap kills people.
Yeah.
Right? That gap ruins people's lives. That gap puts kids in unsafe situations. And that is the gap that we are trying to fill.
Yeah.
And obviously not that therapists don't help at all, but it's to the point. First of all, you might be paying for a therapist who you think might be knowledgeable or have this background, but not all do. And so then you might be kind of shopping around to find one. So that's more money trying to figure out who can actually help with my specific situation. Because, you might go in and find out they kind of look at you like a deer in the headlights, like, oh, maybe I don't really know this. So yeah, there's just all kinds of financial stresses involved. And, Aimee Says is an app, right? That just really is 24/7, obviously, that you can just go into and put things in and have that there.
Yes, and it will make your therapy go further, faster. Your dollars there. It will make your legal dollars go further, faster, and in a better direction to help you stay in work, right? Like the amount of time the documentation takes, how
Yeah.
triggering it is to get a message and then be derailed at work. And, Aimee can take care of all of it and keep you employed because your financial stability is really, really important. It can just do things that humans can't.
Yeah.
That's simply put.
Yeah, and gets it, especially getting it done faster, that hooks so many people, I'm sure, because yes, you can spend hours on hours having to do legal paperwork, and lawyers can reach out anytime and, need more from you and more from you. And it's really nice to have something that kind of has it structured already and can easily help in that task. So, for attorneys and therapists listening, what are the most important signs they should not overlook in coercive control cases?
Gosh, when I talk to attorneys, I think obviously this is a very much a legal adjacent tool. I talk to attorneys in the family court space and I demo the tool and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Oh, look at that. Oh, I have this one client who could really use this." And I think to myself, how many clients do you have? Right? You litigate cases. 80+% of those litigated cases have a power and control dynamic that is keeping someone from their own autonomy.
Yeah.
So I tell that story because to kind of reinforce how uncommon it is for an attorney to recognize that their client may have the short end of the stick, right? Of the power stick. With therapists, especially in the kind of marriage and family practice, the frequency with which power and control dynamics are missed is also really scary. So I would almost say that the people who are already curious enough to ask themselves that question about whether or not they're present, those dynamics are present, are already identifying it. The real question is, how do we get people who it's almost like they can't see that door exists in the hallway that they're walking down. Like, how do we put a bright, shiny, a glittery circle around that door so they have enough curiosity to open it and see if it is true in that client situation? That's, I think, the thing we got to solve.
And kind of to that point, another lived experience here. It's pretty common that court has you just check boxes, and one of those boxes is, oh, you're in a custody case, go take this co-parenting course, right? And it shouldn't be one course fits all because too many dynamics. But so I took an online one just to check that box, and I can't remember verbatim now, but I did take screenshots when I was taking it because it literally did say it mentioned, I believe, coercive control, alienation, abuse, just all these things. And it said, if this is part of what's going on, stop right here. This is not for you. So I sent all these screenshots of this course saying, this keeps saying this is not, this is the dynamic I'm in. We've shown things to that. So if it's saying this course is not for you and implying, there should be something else, well, what is there? Oh, there's nothing. You have to take that. So
Yes.
even to the point that there is nothing in place to help. And so something like Aimee Says, we need more things that actually help these type of dynamics.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I'm actually really happy to hear that the course that you took actually screened for that. And what you just said, that we have made enough progress to start screening for domestic violence, but there is an absolute vacuum on the other side of it. Like, okay, so I just continue to float around in outer space without my needs met. If you go to your gynecologist and, they're going to ask you 4 questions to screen you for whether or not you have been victimized by domestic violence in the past 12 months. And if you say yes, do you know what happens? Maybe you get a pamphlet, right? Yeah. And they note it in your chart. So we know that little piece of information absolutely changes the needs trajectory, in the parenting, class scenario, right? You need to be learning about parallel parenting and like how you can safely set boundaries in that environment. In the health environment, we know that victimization has huge impact on people's short and long-term health outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. They're more likely to get cancer, autoimmune disorders, diabetes, have a stroke, die of cardiovascular disease. All of these things have higher incidence rates in people who have been victimized by domestic violence. And yet, we are only so far in our progress that we have just started screening.
Yeah.
We don't have anything on the other side. If you're listening to this and you're one of those people who wants to be able to offer something on the other side, please contact me. That is a void that we want to fill. That you just sit there and go, well, we don't have anything for you. Like, what a terrible thing to say to someone who is scared to show up to begin with.
Right. Because someone in that situation really does want help. They want support. And I hate to say it, it could mean life or death. People do commit suicide. People have these long-term effects from it. Very sad. And so I believe it needs to be taken more seriously to have some sort of support in place, have help for people in these situations instead of just something saying, oh, if you have this, then let us know. Oh, but there's nothing else further. There's nothing to help. That's very disheartening to someone who's already in such a horrible state or horrible situation, trying to find help and essentially kind of being told there is none. So
yeah, it's like, sorry, it's terminal. Like, really, there's nothing you can do. And so they continue to just white knuckle it through like they have been. Like I said, that's what keeps me up at night. That's a problem that I want to solve, that a lot of people want to solve, that you want to solve, that the advocates out there want to solve, and we want to deploy at mass scale. Right? Yeah. The technology that can do it from the first red flag. Like, lots of people who engage with Aimee just like went on a weird Bumble date and they're like, I don't know, that was kind of weird. Can we talk about that, Aimee? I'm kind of concerned. All the way, from red flag to rock bottom. And, and we're here to build capacity in that full spectrum of space, and want to partner and ally with people who are working to the same end.
Yeah. And Aimee Says is just such a, current dated, earlier kind of saying things are outdated. Here we go. Here's something current, dated, and new, and just technology forward that really helps structure everything for you. And I think that is such a good thing to, come on, let's start moving things forward and go the way we need to in today's age. So I think that's a great tool. And I'm inspired that, you created this and people like you out here doing what you can to help people in these situations. So finally, how can people connect with you or learn more about Aimee Says?
They should hop over to aimeesays.com. It's AIMEE says.com. And any of the contact or support buttons will go directly to my inbox. Find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook. I'd love to engage in continued conversations about, partnerships. How do we get this in front of more people? Because we are all working towards the same goal, and it will take all of the people at people scale to be able to deploy the technology at, the public health population scale so that we can really start moving the needle.
Yeah. And I will definitely put those links when I do post this so people can easily find you and access it. Again, thank you so much for being here today, Anne. It was really valuable and interesting learning about Aimee Says. I mean, I think that's such a great resource, and I'm sure so many people will use that and find it very helpful for them. So thank you again for sharing all that you do and helping people.
Thank you so much, Kaylin, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to You Can't Break Us. If this episode spoke to you, subscribe and leave a review. Every voice matters. Every story counts. If you or someone you know has a story to share, email youcan'tbreakuspodcast@gmail.com to connect with me. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and never stop using your voice. Because no matter what they've tried to take from us, they can't break